Good morning, gardeners, and welcome to Monday, June 5th. My name is Catherine, and I created a show called Good Morning Gardeners, even though I can't grow green things, because I am referring to gardening metaphorically. We are planting the seeds for a better day. We're starting our day by getting in the right mindset to cultivate a better life for ourselves, better communities, and a better world. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like to add Good Morning Gardeners to your morning routine. I do my best to wake you up with positive and mentally stimulating ideas, but sometimes I miss things. If you have something to add to the ideas I discuss, please chime in the comments section below. Today is World Environment Day. This is the 50th World Environment Day, and this year the focus is on plastics. More than 400 million tons of plastic is produced every year worldwide, half of which is designed to be used only once. Of that, less than 10% is recycled. An estimated 19 to 23 million tons end up in lakes, rivers, and seas annually. That is approximately the weight of 2,200 Eiffel Towers altogether. Microplastics, tiny plastic particles up to 5 millimeters in diameter, find their way into food, water, and air. It is estimated that each person on the planet consumes more than 50,000 plastic particles per year, and many more if inhalation is considered. Discarded or burnt single-use plastic harms human health and biodiversity and pollutes every ecosystem from mountaintops to the ocean floor. With available science and solutions to tackle the problem, governments, companies, and other stakeholders must scale up and speed actions to solve this crisis. We have seen a lot of positive action to combat the plastic problem, but we all need to do more and turn off the tap on plastic pollution from the source. There are many things that you as an individual can do, from asking the restaurants you visit to stop using plastic straws, to bringing your own coffee mug to work, to pressuring your local authorities to improve how they manage your city's waste. You can visit worldenvironmentday.global, linked in the comment section of this, in the description section of this video, to learn more. So whenever I give a call to action to, do something to somehow help the environment, I always feel this pang of awkwardness, because I've heard this argument so many times that any influence, any effect that the average individual can have is so minuscule and so tiny that it pales in comparison to what corporations and, celebrities and the super rich are doing to the environment, for example, with their private jets. I'm sure you've all heard something like that before. And I don't typically have a very good response to this argument, because it is compelling. It is true, I do feel intuitively that this mindset is a way to offload responsibility, or maybe just it might be used as an excuse to be lazy or apathetic, but I ultimately can't argue with the position, because it is true. Corporations and the super rich do harm the environment way more than the average individual. And, I think, I do think, however, that there is an argument to be made for the impact that the average individual can make. And William MacAskill makes, I think, a pretty strong argument in his book, Doing Good Better. So we're going to start our learning moment today by reading this section. So far in this book, we have focused on measurable, concrete ways of helping others. The real world, unfortunately, is not always so simple. Often we don't know whether our actions will be successful, and given the difficulty of knowing what would have happened otherwise, we will usually never know whether our actions really made a difference. We therefore need a way to compare higher risk but higher upside actions with actions that are certain to have an impact. Within economics and decision theory, the standard way to do this is to look at an action's expected value. To take a simple example, suppose I offer you a bet. I'll flip a coin, and if the coin lands on heads, I'll give you $2. If the coin lands tails, You give me $1. Should you take the bet? According to the idea of expected value, you should. To calculate the expected monetary value of each bet, you look at all the possible outcomes of that bet. For each outcome, you take the monetary gain or loss and multiply it by the probability of the outcome. In this case, there are 2 possible outcomes, heads and tails. Each has a 50% chance of occurring. The expected monetary value of taking the bet is therefore 50% times $2 plus 50% times -$1, and that equals 50 cents. The expected monetary value of refusing the bet is 0. Taking the bet has the higher expected value, which was 50 cents, so you should take the bet. So William MacAskill goes on to discuss how you can apply this same mathematical principle to, or mathematical formula to deciding whether or not to vote. And I think that is really interesting, and I might discuss that when we get closer to, election season. But I'm going to skip ahead for now, and I am going to skip to the part where he translates this idea of expected value to consumer decisions, deciding what to buy. So he restates the problem here, and this is the same sort of mindset that I think follows from what I was speaking about earlier. It's that if many people do a thing, make a change, then real change can happen, real progress can be made. But if any one individual person does that change, makes that difference, then overall, the whole picture won't really change because the single individual has so little effect. So if many people did this thing, then change would happen. But if any individual person doesn't make a difference. Holding that combination of views is usually a mistake when we consider expected value. Consider ethical consumption, like switching to fair trade coffee or reducing how much meat you buy. Suppose someone stops buying chicken breasts instead choosing vegetarian options in order to reduce the amount of animal suffering on factory farms. Does that person make a difference? You might think not. If one person decides against buying chicken breast one day, but the rest of the meat eaters on the planet continue to buy chicken, how could that possibly affect how many chickens are killed for human consumption? When a supermarket decides how much chicken to buy, they don't care that one fewer breast was purchased on any given day. However, if thousands or millions of people stopped buying chicken breasts, the number of chickens raised for food would decrease. Supply would fall to meet demand. But then we're left with a paradox. Individuals can't make a difference, but millions of individuals do. But the actions of millions of people are just the sum of the actions of many individual people. Moreover, an iron law of economics is that in a well-functioning market, if demand for a product decreases, the quantity of the product that's supplied decreases. How then can we reconcile these thoughts? The answer lies with expected value. If you decline to buy some chicken breast, then most of the time you'll make no difference. The supermarket will buy the same amount of chicken in the future. Sometimes, however, you will make a difference. Occasionally, the manager of the store will assess the number of chicken breasts bought by consumers and decide to decrease their intake of stock, even though they wouldn't have done so had the number of chicken breasts bought been one higher. Perhaps they follow a rule like, if fewer than 5,000 chicken breasts were bought this month, decrease stock intake. And when the manager does decide to decrease their stock intake, they will decrease stock by a large amount. Perhaps your decision against purchasing chicken breast will have an effect on the supermarket only 1 in 1,000 times, but that one time, the store manager will decide to purchase approximately 1,000 fewer chicken breasts. This isn't just a theoretical argument. Economists have studied this issue and worked out how, on average, a consumer affects the number of animal products supplied by declining to buy that product. They estimate that, on average, if you give up 1 egg, total production ultimately falls by 0.91 eggs. If you give up a gallon of milk, total production falls by 0.56 gallons. Other products are somewhere in between. Economists estimate that if you give up 1 pound of beef, beef production falls by 0.68 pounds. If you give up 1 pound of pork, production ultimately falls by 0.74 pounds. If you give up 1 pound of chicken, production ultimately falls by 0.76 pounds. So, as I said, William MacAskill also applies this logic to how to decide whether to vote and whether to participate in a political rally. And obviously, I am not talking about meat or politics today. I am talking about plastic. Unfortunately, this is the only book that I have read that has this kind of discussion in it. But if you have a recommendation, please drop it in the comments for something that's a little bit more, plastic or environment focused. But still, I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that an individual can decrease plastic production the same way that they can reduce chicken production. And then you can imagine the impact of one individual, refusing to buy plastic straws, for example, or refusing to take plastic bags, and multiply that across hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of us, and imagine how over time, it could add up in a big way. Now, is that going to solve all of the environmental problems? No. And this leads me to our feel-good moment for today, because I feel that Sarah Wilson addresses this topic beautifully in her book, This One Wild and Precious Life. So I am going to jump in today and begin reading from the chapter or section called Now We Change the World. As Anne Frank once wrote, "How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world." This, from a 15-year-old confined in terrifying isolation in an attic, is particularly marvelous and motivating. It struck me it wasn't enough to wake up, reconnect, or meet in that field and hang out for a bit, having more soulful chats and loving on life. We had to get more marvelous with things. There's a wisdom from Jungian psychologist and profile author James Hollis that haunts me. He says that eventually, once we're connected and informed enough, our soul will call us to an appointment with life. Our souls are our knowingness. They perceive when we are off track and not living in service, not actually doing anything to help improve the world. And they say, "Oi," Sarah is Australian, "Oi, time for you, me and life to meet up." We might ignore the calls for a bit, but as Hollis explains, the soul does not give up. We might think that as we're on track, that we're doing enough, but if our souls have other ideas, they will summon us again and again. I don't know about you, but as I become more aware and informed of the state of our planet and the inequalities and the cruelty we've allowed to seep in on our watch, the same question keeps coming up. Why isn't anyone doing anything? We know the facts. We can see the planet crumbling. The community is asking for our help. We want to give more love. We are lonely, so why are we staying stuck in a consumer cycle we know makes us sad? Why are we scrolling? Why are we ducking from the truth, from each other, from a fully wild life? Why aren't we mobilizing like the world did at the beginning of World War II? But, of course, there is always an opportunity to rephrase a question more beautifully. What I was really asking was, why am I not doing enough to save this one wild and precious life? Hollis writes extensively on what matters most in life, mercifully refusing to defer to the pat answers like happiness and having more me time. Hollis's work had been inspiring me for years, so I wrote to him when I arrived at this quandary and asked for help. He called me the following week on FaceTime from his study in Washington, D.C. Hollis is in his early 80s now, with a sweep of white hair, and was dressed in a shirt, tie, waistcoat, and woolen checked jacket, exactly how I want a Jungian analyst to greet me. Our souls are getting louder because the times are dictating they must, he told me. That's what they do when we're off track. They will inundate our psychic feeds with relentless notifications, reminders, perhaps violent pokes, illness, and slapdowns, until we front up to our appointment. At a collective level, they might throw a bushfire, a pandemic, a truly challenging president or prime minister at us, appropriate prompts that reflect the state of our off-trackness. In his book, What Matters Most, Hollis writes that the calls can take the form of longings, suffering, or dreams. Noisy demonstrations are held in the amphitheater of the body. Streets are blocked in the brain by rebels from the cane fields. Dreams are invaded by spectral disturbances. Effects riot and tear down the work of years. Eventually, we must take the call. Throughout my life, it has generally taken repeated, increasingly violent prods for me to answer. The call first represents as an itch that turns into chronic stress, and it transmutes into a serious illness that can knock me to the ground. My various autoimmune diseases, my insomnia, bipolar, and other anxious disorders have all served to make me stop, pay attention, and clamber my way to the appointment, if only because I have nowhere else to go. And in that moment, when I finally show up, I realize that the most beautiful question of all, the most beautiful question of the whole quest, is in fact the one I must ask of life. Ready for it? Okay, life, what are you asking of me? Most recently, and with more urgency, life has been asking me to get over myself, fire up, and act. I asked Hollis what he made of this. He said, I think we're all being summoned to fight for this life. Not merely our own flesh and blood lives, not even for the planet necessarily, but for the sense of life we know we come from and belong to. But for the sense of life we know we come from and belong to. The oneness. Big life, capitalized. That the big life that we access is best through group soul, as opposed to our little individual lowercase lives. And frankly, I think we are glad to have been summoned. So, what is life asking of you? To do your bit? To make some adjustments? I can't answer for everyone here, but I have received the very strong message, thanks to my soul dragging me repeatedly to the front line of my consciousness these past few years, that life is asking us to do everything we can. You could view it like this. Everything got us into this mess. Everything is affected, and so it's going to take everything to get out of it. Now, perhaps, like me, you've spent a lot of time debating whether the carbon emissions saved by quitting meat are greater than getting rid of your car, whether switching to an electric car is worthwhile when the electricity is dirty in your state, and besides, you've read that it takes 7 years to pay off the additional emissions that go into manufacturing a Prius. Whether you should enforce a no devices after 7 p.m. rule in your home, or campaign to get phones banned at your kid's school. Whether it's worth writing to your local council member when she just supported another coal exploration license, or switching to an ethical superannuation policy and donating to wildlife groups. I have gotten sucked into all the debates back and forth, justifying my resistance to change with a counter-argument here, trying to offset my guilt over there. It became a cerebral slinging match of issues, of rights and wrongs, with an impossible goal, finding the one true thing that will fix everything. The upshot of this approach? We get overwhelmed, shut down, and do nothing. Obviously, this one thing doesn't exist, and the sooner we accept this, the less overwhelmed and more active we will be. The actual call to arms being issued, that we do everything, is far neater and joyous and doable. Just do everything you can. Don't stop. Don't get caught up in granular fights that dastardly fear, guilt, anger, despair, overwhelm cycle. Don't worry about how others are doing everything. Just keep doing yours, and then do some more. This is a beautiful private journey we are taking, but we must be the change we want to see, and then others may board our bus. As I flag in that bulleted list of climate change factlets, we must all do everything we can do all at once, at the individual consumer level and the activist level, with no one thing being right, but also nothing being wrong. And keep going, for action begets action, and from little things, big things grow. So this idea of big things growing from little things is something I think and talk about quite often. I know I've spoken about it several times before on this show. So for today's focus moment, I am going to offer you a prompt that addresses this topic from a slightly different perspective. Today, I don't want you to put any more effort into conceptualizing how big things grow from small things. I want you to instead think about at length, ponder how pleasant these small things really are. Because no matter how well we understand these concepts, when it comes down to a moment of choice, we so often choose what feels best, especially if we are tired or hungry. So I think it's a really helpful mental exercise to imagine all of the plastic alternative choices, for example, that just feel good. Maybe a paper straw doesn't feel better on your lips than a plastic straw does, but it sure does feel better to throw a paper straw away. I always feel terrible when I throw a plastic straw away. And how good does it feel to prepare your own beverage at home and sip it from a glass straw? I also think it feels quite nice to sip an ice-cold beverage straight from the cup, forgoing the straw altogether. I invite you to think of all the little things with the potential to grow into big things that will improve the world, that feel amazing. And if you think of one that you really love, please share it with me in the comments. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you have a wonderful day. I will speak with you again tomorrow.